Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we journey into the realm of one of the most revered and complex figures in all of Greek mythology. A goddess born not from a womb, but from the mind itself. A warrior who championed strategy over slaughter, wisdom over wrath. A virgin deity who shaped the destiny of heroes and entire civilizations. Tonight, we explore the extraordinary life and enduring legacy of Athena. Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let the story unfold. In the grand pantheon of Olympian gods, where Zeus thundered from his throne and Poseidon stirred the seas, where Aphrodite wove love and Ares reveled in bloodshed, one goddess stood apart. Athena embodied something different, something that transcended mere power or passion. She represented the marriage of strength and intellect, the understanding that true victory comes not from the mightiest blow, but from the sharpest mind. The ancient Greeks saw in Athena their highest aspirations. She was not simply a deity to be feared or appeased through sacrifice. She was a model of excellence, an ideal toward which mortals could strive. Where other gods acted on impulse and emotion, Athena calculated and planned. Where others sought personal glory, she worked for the greater good of civilization itself. In her, the Greeks found not just divine protection, but inspiration for how to live, how to think, and how to build a society that would endure through the ages. Her influence reached far beyond the marble temples built in her honor. She walked beside heroes in their darkest hours, whispering counsel when courage faltered. She guided the hands of craftsmen and the minds of philosophers. She taught that warfare need not be mindless violence, but could be an art requiring discipline, strategy, and purpose. And in the city that bore her name, Athens became a beacon of culture, democracy, and learning that would illuminate the ancient world and echo through millennia. But Athena was no simple paragon of virtue. Like all Greek deities, she possessed depths and contradictions that made her profoundly complex. She could be merciful and merciless, nurturing and vengeful, a protector who could also destroy. Her myths reveal a goddess who demanded respect, who punished hubris without hesitation, yet who also showed unexpected compassion. To understand Athena is to understand the Greek world itself, with all its brilliance and brutality, its wisdom and its contradictions. Tonight we will trace her story from that impossible birth, through the contests and battles that defined her character, to the heroes she championed and the mortals who dared to challenge her. We will explore the symbols that marked her presence, from the wise owl perched upon her shoulder to the terrible Gorgon's head emblazoned upon her shield. We will walk through the temples raised in her honor and witness the festivals that celebrated her gifts to humanity. The story of Athena is not merely ancient history. It is a meditation on the nature of wisdom, the responsibility that comes with power, and the enduring question of how intelligence and strength can work together to create something greater than either alone. It is a reminder that the greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the councils where decisions are made, in the workshops where crafts are perfected, and in the minds of those who dare to think deeply about the world around them. So let us begin at the beginning, in the court of Olympus, where a prophecy was spoken that would shake the foundations of divine order and give birth to the goddess who would define what it meant to be truly wise. Long before Hera sat beside Zeus as queen of the gods, another held that position. Her name was Metis, and she was no ordinary goddess. Metis embodied something that even Zeus, for all his thunderous power, recognized as essential: wisdom itself. Her very name meant cunning intelligence, the kind of practical, adaptive thinking that could navigate any challenge. She was resourcefulness personified, the ability to find solutions where none seemed to exist. Zeus, in his early reign over Olympus, sought out Metis as his first wife. He understood even then that raw power alone would not be enough to maintain his rule. He needed what Metis possessed: the foresight to anticipate threats, the cleverness to outmaneuver rivals, the wisdom to make decisions that would secure his throne for eternity. Their union seemed natural, inevitable even. The king of the gods wed to the titaness of intelligence. Together, they would shape the divine order of the cosmos. But fate, as it so often does in Greek mythology, had different plans. An oracle, speaking with the authority of primordial truth, delivered a prophecy that chilled even Zeus's divine heart. Metis would bear 2 children. The first would be a daughter, equal to her father in wisdom and strength, but the second would be a son destined to overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown his own father Cronus, who had in turn overthrown Uranus before him. The cycle of divine patricide, it seemed, was fated to continue. This prophecy awakened in Zeus a terror that had haunted his family for generations. He remembered his father Cronus, who had swallowed his own children whole rather than face the possibility of being supplanted. Zeus himself had been hidden away by his mother Rhea to escape that fate, only to return and fulfill the prophecy by overthrowing Cronus and casting the Titans into Tartarus. Now the wheel was turning again, and Zeus found himself on the other side of the prophecy. Fear makes even gods act irrationally. Zeus, who prided himself on his cunning, resorted to the same desperate measure his father had used, but he was cleverer than Cronus. He did not simply swallow his children after they were born. Instead, when Metis was pregnant with their first child, Zeus tricked her. Using honeyed words and false reassurances, he convinced her to transform herself into various shapes, displaying her metamorphic abilities. And when she took the form of a fly, the smallest and most vulnerable shape, Zeus opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. He thought the problem solved. The prophecy could not be fulfilled if Metis never gave birth. The son who might overthrow him would never be born. Zeus believed he had outsmarted fate itself, that he had learned from his father's mistakes and found a better solution. He was wrong. Inside Zeus, something impossible was happening. Metis did not die. She could not die, for she was immortal, and the child she carried continued to grow. But now that child developed not in a womb, but within Zeus himself. The goddess of wisdom, trapped inside the god of thunder, began to craft something extraordinary. She forged armor and weapons, preparing her daughter for the moment of birth. And as the child grew, Zeus began to suffer. The pain started as a dull ache, then grew into something far worse. It felt as though his skull was being split from within. Some accounts say the headache tormented him for months. Others claim it came on suddenly, a blinding agony that brought the king of the gods to his knees. He clutched his head, roaring in anguish, and even the other Olympians could not ease his suffering. No remedy worked. No prayer brought relief. The pain only intensified, building toward an impossible crescendo. Finally, Zeus could bear it no longer. He called for Hephaestus, the divine smith, master of forge and fire. Some versions of the myth say Zeus commanded him to split his skull open. Others suggest Prometheus, the Titan who had sided with Zeus during the war against Cronus, wielded the axe. Regardless of who held the blade, the act itself was the same. A bronze axe, swung with all the strength of a god, came down upon Zeus's forehead. The blow struck true, and Zeus's skull opened like a ripe fruit in summer. But instead of blood and brain matter, something else emerged. Light blazed forth, so brilliant that the assembled gods shielded their eyes. The air itself seemed to tremble. And from that impossible wound, fully grown and fully armed, leaped Athena. She was born already adult, already armored, already wise. She wore a helmet of gleaming bronze, carried a spear sharp enough to pierce the heavens, and held a shield that would become her most famous attribute. She gave a war cry that shook Olympus to its foundations, a shout that announced to all the cosmos that something new had entered the world. The other gods stepped back in awe and perhaps a touch of fear, for they had never witnessed a birth like this. Athena was born from thought itself, from the mind of Zeus mingled with the wisdom of Metis. She carried her mother's intelligence, but also her father's authority. She was a goddess who owed no debt to the process of birth that bound other deities to their mothers. She emerged complete, perfect, ready to take her place among the Olympians without the need for growth or maturation. In a pantheon where goddesses often represented the feminine through fertility, sexuality, or domestic concerns, Athena represented something different, pure intellect given divine form. The symbolism of this birth runs deeper than mere spectacle. Athena emerged from Zeus's head, the seat of thought and decision. She was literally born from wisdom, from contemplation, from the mental processes that separate thinking beings from mere beasts. Her unusual origin marked her as different from other gods. While Aphrodite was born from the sea foam created by Uranus's severed genitals, and while Dionysus was sewn into Zeus's thigh after his mother's death, Athena's birth from the head itself suggested something profound about her nature. She was reason incarnate, strategy given flesh, wisdom made manifest. And crucially, the prophecy's second half never came to pass. The son who might have overthrown Zeus was never born. By swallowing Metis, Zeus had indeed prevented that fate, but at the cost of absorbing her wisdom into himself. From that moment forward, Zeus was said to carry Metis's counsel within him, and Athena became his favorite child, the one who sat at his right hand, the one whose advice he sought above all others. She became the daughter who would not betray him because she carried within herself both his authority and her mother's wisdom perfectly balanced. The birth of Athena marked a turning point in the divine order. Here was a goddess who combined the masculine world of warfare and politics with the feminine realm of craft and wisdom. She stood at the intersection of traditionally separate spheres, a bridge between categories that the ancient Greeks usually kept distinct. And from that moment of impossible birth, Athena would go on to shape not just the lives of gods and heroes, but the very definition of what it meant to be civilized, to think deeply, to fight intelligently, and to build something worth defending. If you were to ask an ancient Greek what single word best described Athena, the answer would come without hesitation: wisdom. But to understand Athena's wisdom is to understand that the Greeks had a more nuanced concept of intelligence than we often recognize today. Wisdom was not merely book learning or philosophical contemplation, though Athena certainly embodied those qualities. It was practical, applicable knowledge. It was the ability to see clearly, to judge rightly, to act decisively when action was needed, and to counsel patience when haste would lead to ruin. Athena's wisdom manifested in countless ways throughout Greek mythology. She was the goddess who understood that knowledge without action was sterile, but action without thought was dangerous. She represented the kind of intelligence that could adapt to circumstances, that could find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems, that could see 3 moves ahead like a master playing a cosmic game of chess. Her wisdom was strategic, tactical, and deeply practical. This quality set her apart from other deities who might claim dominion over the mind. Apollo possessed prophetic knowledge, the ability to see the future and speak through oracles. But prophecy, while powerful, lacked the flexibility that Athena embodied. She dealt not in predetermined fate, but in strategic possibility. She showed mortals and gods alike that wisdom meant understanding the situation you faced and making the best possible decision with the information available. Where Apollo's gift of foresight could be cryptic and riddling, Athena's wisdom was clear-eyed and direct. Most tellingly, Athena's wisdom placed her in direct contrast with Ares, the god of war. Both were warriors, both were associated with battle and conflict, but the difference between them revealed everything about what Athena represented. Ares embodied the fury of combat, the bloodlust that overtakes soldiers in the chaos of battle, the rage and violence that war unleashes. He gloried in carnage for its own sake, in the sheer physical dominance of slaughter. He was war stripped of purpose, reduced to its most primal and destructive element. Athena rejected this completely. She was the goddess of strategic warfare, of battles fought with purpose and planning. She championed the disciplined phalanx over the berserker's charge, the carefully planned siege over the impulsive attack. When Athena went to war, it was with clear objectives and a path to victory that minimized unnecessary bloodshed. She understood that the goal of warfare should be peace, not endless conflict. She knew that the best victory was one that left your city standing, your people alive and your civilization intact. In Homer's Iliad, this distinction plays out vividly. Ares enters the fray with wild abandon, fighting for the Trojans simply because it amuses him to do so. He is wounded and retreats to Olympus, complaining to Zeus about his injury like a petulant child. Athena, on the other hand, fights alongside the Greeks with purpose. She inspires Diomedes to acts of heroism, guides spears to their marks, and even confronts Ares directly, striking him down with a boulder when his bloodthirsty rampage threatens her favored warriors. The message was clear. Intelligence and strategy would always triumph over mindless violence. This theme repeated itself throughout Greek culture. The Greeks, particularly the Athenians, prided themselves on being thinking people, not just warriors. They built academies and theatres, held philosophical debates in the agora, created democracy as a system where decisions were made through reasoned argument rather than by the strongest warrior claiming authority. In Athena, they saw divine endorsement of this worldview. She proved that the mind was humanity's greatest weapon, that civilization was built not on brute strength, but on the ability to think, plan, and create. Athena's wisdom also extended beyond warfare into the realm of crafts and skilled work. She was patron of weavers, potters, shipbuilders, and all manner of artisans. This might seem strange to modern minds, to link warfare with craftsmanship, but the Greeks understood something profound. Both require the same qualities. A master weaver must think several steps ahead, understanding how threads will interact to create a pattern. A shipbuilder must calculate stresses and balances, must know materials and techniques, must create something that will hold together under the worst conditions the sea can throw at it. These are strategic acts, requiring the same mental discipline that Athena brought to battle. The goddess taught humanity not just how to make things, but how to make them well. She represented excellence in execution, the marriage of skill and knowledge that transforms raw materials into works of lasting value. Whether guiding a warrior's spear or a craftsman's hands, Athena embodied the principle that understanding what you were doing and why you were doing it would always produce superior results to thoughtless action. As counselor to gods and mortals alike, Athena played a role that few other deities could match. She sat at Zeus's right hand, offering advice on the governance of both the divine and mortal realms. When the gods faced difficult decisions, when conflicts arose that threatened to tear Olympus apart, Athena was often the voice of reason that found a path forward. She had inherited her mother Metis's gift for seeing solutions where others saw only impossible choices. Heroes sought her guidance because they knew she would not simply grant them power, but would teach them how to think, how to approach their challenges intelligently. When Perseus faced the impossible task of slaying Medusa, Athena did not slay the Gorgon for him. Instead, she gave him the tools and wisdom he needed, a polished shield that could serve as a mirror, advice on how to approach the monster, and the strategic understanding that sometimes the indirect approach succeeds where direct confrontation fails. She made Perseus better, smarter, more capable. That was her gift to those she favored. This approach to wisdom, this understanding that intelligence must be active and engaged with the world, made Athena uniquely relevant to human life. She was not a distant goddess concerned only with abstract philosophy. She walked beside mortals in their daily struggles, inspiring architects to design buildings that would stand for centuries, guiding generals to victories that preserved rather than destroyed, teaching that every problem had a solution if you were clever enough to find it. In a world of gods who represented passion, power, love, death, and the forces of nature, Athena stood for something both more subtle and more profound. She represented the uniquely human capacity to think our way through challenges, to use our minds to shape the world around us. She was the divine embodiment of the principle that reason, properly applied, was the greatest force in the cosmos. And in her, the Greeks found not just a protector, but a teacher, showing them that wisdom, courage, and skill, combined in the right proportions, could accomplish anything. There came a time when a great city stood unnamed, awaiting a patron deity who would shape its destiny. The city occupied a strategic position, blessed with natural harbors and commanding heights, surrounded by fertile lands. It had potential to become something magnificent, but it needed more than location. It needed divine favor. It needed a god or goddess who would invest in its future, protect its people, and give it an identity that would endure through the ages. Two mighty Olympians set their sights on this prize. Poseidon, lord of the seas, god of earthquakes and horses, saw the strategic value of the coastal settlement. His oceans surrounded it. His power could make or break it. He believed the city should be his. And then there was Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, who saw in this young community the potential for something greater than just another city. She saw the possibility of civilization elevated to its highest form, a place where wisdom would flourish alongside courage, where culture and democracy could bloom. The competition between them, would become one of the most famous founding myths in all of Greek culture. A story that every Athenian child learned, a tale carved into the pediments of the Parthenon itself. The contest was simple in concept, but profound in implication. Each deity would offer the city a gift, and the citizens, led by their king Cecrops, would choose which gift they valued more. The winner would become the city's patron, and the city would bear that god's name for all time. Poseidon went first, approaching with the confidence of a god whose power was beyond question. He raised his mighty trident, that three-pronged spear that could summon storms and split mountains. With a tremendous strike, he drove it into the rocky hill that would one day become the Acropolis. The earth shook, stone cracked, and from the wound in the rock, water began to flow. A spring had been created where none existed before. Water, the essence of life, now flowed in the heart of the city. It was an impressive display of divine power, dramatic and immediate. The watching citizens gasped at the sight. Poseidon smiled, certain of his victory. What could be more valuable than water itself? But as the people approached to examine this miraculous spring, they discovered something that changed everything. The water was salty. It was seawater, drawn from Poseidon's ocean realm, useless for drinking, useless for irrigation. Some versions of the myth say that Poseidon also offered the horse, that magnificent animal that had revolutionized warfare and transportation. But the saline spring remained his primary gift, a spectacular demonstration of power that lacked practical value for the city's daily needs. Now it was Athena's turn. She did not arrive with thunder and earthquake. She did not strike the earth with violent force. Instead, she knelt with quiet dignity and planted something in the soil. The people watched, perhaps puzzled at first. What could this simple act mean? What gift was this? And then they saw the miracle. From the earth where Athena had planted, a tree began to grow. Not slowly, over years as trees normally develop, but rapidly, miraculously, until it stood tall and strong before them. Its leaves shimmered silver green in the Mediterranean sun. Its branches spread wide, offering shade, and hanging from those branches were small, dark fruits, unlike any the people had seen before. This was the olive tree, and Athena explained its gifts to the gathered assembly. The olives themselves were food, nutritious and sustaining. They could be pressed to produce oil, which served countless purposes. The oil could be burned in lamps to push back the darkness. It could be used in cooking, making other foods more flavorful and digestible. It could be applied to skin and hair, cleansing and protecting. Athletes could rub it on their bodies before competition. The oil was valuable for trade, a commodity that could be exchanged for other goods the city might need. But the gifts did not end there. The wood of the olive tree was strong and beautiful, useful for construction and crafting. The tree itself was hardy, able to survive drought and poor soil, living for centuries with proper care. A single olive grove could feed a family for generations. And beyond all its practical applications, the olive tree carried symbolic meaning. It represented peace, prosperity, and the patient cultivation of civilization itself. The olive took years to mature and produce its first fruit, but once established, it gave generously and endlessly. The contrast could not have been more stark. Poseidon had offered spectacle, a dramatic display of divine might that ultimately provided nothing the city could use. Athena had offered something that seemed humble at first glance, but revealed itself to be infinitely valuable. Her gift required no explanation beyond its own utility. It was wisdom made manifest, the understanding that true value lay not in impressive displays, but in lasting benefit. King Cecrops, that wise and ancient ruler who was said to have been half man and half serpent, called for a judgment. In some versions of the myth, he alone made the decision. In others, the citizens themselves voted, with the women voting for Athena and the men for Poseidon. But the count favored the goddess. In still other tellings, the 12 Olympian gods themselves weighed the gifts and pronounced Athena the winner. The verdict was clear. Athena had won. The city would be hers, and it would take her name, Athens. Poseidon, predictably, did not accept this decision gracefully. His rage shook the earth. In his fury, he sent a flood to punish the city for rejecting his gift. Some stories say he tried to have his son Halirrhothius cut down the sacred olive tree, but the attempt ended in the son's accidental death, killed by his own axe. Eventually, the other gods intervened to calm Poseidon's wrath, and a compromise was reached. Though Athena was the primary patron, Poseidon would also be honored in Athens. The Erechtheion, the sacred temple that stood on the Acropolis, housed shrines to both deities, acknowledging that while wisdom had won the contest, the sea god's power could not be ignored. The implications of this founding myth rippled through Athenian identity for centuries. The city had chosen wisdom over raw power, practical benefit over impressive display, long-term prosperity over immediate spectacle. These values would define Athens as it grew from a modest settlement into one of the most influential city-states in human history. The choice of Athena shaped everything from political philosophy to military strategy, from the arts that flourished in the city to the democratic institutions that gave citizens a voice in their own governance. The sacred olive tree itself became a living symbol of Athens' covenant with its patron goddess. Ancient sources tell us that the original tree stood on the Acropolis for centuries. When the Persians invaded in 480 BCE and burned Athens, they destroyed the sacred tree. But according to Herodotus, a shoot grew from the burned stump the very next day, 18 inches in a single night, a miraculous sign that Athena had not abandoned her city even in its darkest hour. That tree, or its descendants, continued to grow on the Acropolis, a living reminder of the goddess's gift and the city's wise choice. Even today, an olive tree stands near the Erechtheion, said to occupy the same location as Athena's original gift. Whether it is the same tree, or a descendant, or a symbolic replacement planted in more recent times, matters less than what it represents. For thousands of years, that spot has marked the place where wisdom was chosen over power, where a goddess taught humanity that the greatest gifts are not always the most spectacular, and where a city earned a name that would echo through history. The contest between Athena and Poseidon reminds us that civilization is built on choices. We can chase after impressive displays and immediate gratification, or we can invest in things that provide lasting value. We can admire raw power, or we can cultivate wisdom. Athens chose the latter, and in doing so created a legacy that survives long after its political power faded. The city that chose the olive tree over the saltwater spring became the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, and so much else that we consider essential to Western civilization. And through it all, Athena stood watch, her sacred tree growing strong, and her wisdom guiding the city that bore her name. Among the many roles Athena filled in Greek mythology, perhaps none was more personal or more consequential than her position as champion and guardian of heroes. She did not merely watch from Olympus as mortals struggled with their fates. She descended into their stories, walked beside them in their trials, and guided them through challenges that would have destroyed lesser souls. But Athena's patronage came with expectations. She did not grant her favor lightly, and those who earned it had to prove themselves worthy not just through strength, but through cleverness, courage, and moral character. The relationship between Athena and her chosen heroes reveals much about what the goddess valued. She favored those who fought not for personal glory, but for righteous causes. She aided those who used their minds as well as their muscles, who approached impossible tasks with strategy rather than brute force. And she remained loyal to those who honored her, even when fate turned against them. One of the earliest and most famous heroes to receive Athena's assistance was Perseus, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae. Perseus faced a challenge that seemed designed to kill him. King Polydectes, desiring Danae for himself, sent Perseus to bring back the head of Medusa, one of the three Gorgon sisters. This was no ordinary monster. In the earliest Greek sources, including Hesiod's writings, Medusa was born a Gorgon, a monstrous being from birth with serpents for hair and a gaze that turned anyone who looked directly upon her face instantly to stone. The later Roman poet Ovid told a different version where Medusa had once been a beautiful maiden transformed by Athena's curse after Poseidon violated her in the goddess's temple. But this account appears centuries after the original Greek myths and may reflect Ovid's own artistic choices rather than authentic Greek tradition. Regardless of her origins, Medusa's power was terrifying. Statues of warriors stood frozen around her lair, permanent testaments to the futility of confronting her with normal weapons and tactics. Perseus could have died like so many before him. He would have died if not for Athena. The goddess appeared to him, not with a promise to do the work for him, but with the tools and knowledge he would need to succeed. She gave him a bronze shield, polished to a mirror finish. This was the key to everything. Perseus could not look directly at Medusa without being petrified, but he could see her reflection. The shield transformed an impossible task into a solvable problem, but only if Perseus had the intelligence to understand how to use it. Athena did more than provide equipment. She offered strategic advice, explaining how to approach the Gorgons while they slept, how to strike quickly and surely, and how to escape from Medusa's immortal sisters who would surely pursue him. She taught Perseus that indirect approaches could succeed where direct confrontation would fail, that cunning was not cowardice, but wisdom. The goddess made Perseus think, made him strategize, made him into more than just another warrior swinging a blade. When Perseus succeeded, when he severed Medusa's head and escaped with it sealed in a magical bag, he returned to Athena as he had promised. He offered her the Gorgon's head as a gift of gratitude. Athena accepted, but rather than hiding it away, she placed Medusa's head on her aegis, her shield or breastplate. From that moment forward, Athena bore the Gorgonean, the image of Medusa's face, as both protection and weapon. The same power that had turned men to stone now served the goddess of wisdom, a reminder that even the most terrible things could be transformed into tools of justice when wielded by the right hands. But if Perseus's story showed Athena as teacher and provider of tools, the tales of Odysseus revealed her as something more intimate, a mentor, a constant presence, almost a friend. The relationship between Athena and Odysseus ran deeper than mere divine patronage. They understood each other in ways that transcended the usual gulf between god and mortal. Odysseus was called Polytropos, the man of many turns, clever and adaptable, never the strongest warrior, but always the smartest. Athena recognized in him a kindred spirit, a mortal who thought like she did. Homer's Odyssey is as much a story of Athena's guidance as it is of Odysseus's journey home. From the poem's opening, where she pleads with Zeus to let the hero finally return to Ithaca, to the final scenes where she helps him reclaim his household from the suitors, Athena is present, active, invested in Odysseus's success in ways she was with no other mortal. But her assistance was never simple or straightforward. Athena pushed Odysseus to be his best self. She tested him, challenged him, even allowed him to suffer when that suffering would teach him something he needed to learn. When Odysseus landed on Ithaca after 20 years of war and wandering, she disguised him as an old beggar, hiding his true identity, even from his own eyes at first. This was not cruelty. It was strategy. Odysseus needed to see his house through different eyes, needed to understand how thoroughly the suitors had corrupted his household, needed to plan his revenge carefully rather than rushing in blindly. Throughout the Odyssey, Athena appeared to Odysseus's family in various guises. She took the form of mentor, an old family friend, to guide Odysseus's son Telemachus, teaching the young man how to assert himself and search for his father. The English word mentor, meaning a trusted teacher and guide, comes directly from this role. Athena became mentor to help Telemachus grow from an uncertain boy into a capable young man, preparing him for the day when he would fight alongside his father. She appeared as a swallow, as a young shepherd, as a beautiful tall woman. Athena was a shapeshifter, adapting her form to circumstances, showing different aspects of herself as needed. But beneath all the disguises, Odysseus always recognized her. There was a famous exchange between them on the beaches of Ithaca, where Odysseus, still not knowing he was home, told her an elaborate lie about his identity. Athena smiled at this, dropped her disguise, and praised him for his cunning. They were alike, she told him, both clever, both always thinking, both able to deceive when necessary. It was perhaps the most intimate moment between deity and mortal in all of Greek literature, a recognition that wisdom creates its own kind of kinship. Athena's guidance extended beyond Odysseus and Perseus. She aided Heracles in his labors, helping him drive away the Stymphalian birds, by giving him special rattles to frighten them into flight. She assisted Bellerophon in capturing Pegasus, the winged horse, providing him with a golden bridle that tamed the wild creature. She counseled Jason and the Argonauts, helping them navigate the dangers of their quest for the Golden Fleece. In each case, her assistants followed the same pattern. Provide tools, offer wisdom, but let the heroes themselves rise to their challenges. What Athena understood, what made her such an effective patron, was that simply giving heroes power would not help them grow. True heroism required more than divine intervention. It required courage, intelligence, and moral character. Athena's role was to enhance these qualities, not replace them. She made good heroes better, clever heroes wiser, brave heroes more thoughtful. She never did their work for them, but she ensured they had what they needed to do it themselves. This approach to patronage set Athena apart from other gods. When Aphrodite aided her favorites, she clouded their judgment with passion. When Ares inspired warriors, he filled them with bloodlust that often led to their deaths. When Apollo showed favor, he might share prophecy, but often in riddles that confused as much as they clarified. Athena gave clear counsel, practical tools, and strategic wisdom. Her heroes succeeded not because she won their battles for them, but because she taught them how to win their own battles. The heroes who earned Athena's favor became more than just successful warriors. They became examples of what humanity could achieve when strength and wisdom worked together. Perseus used cunning to defeat what brute force could not. Odysseus relied on his mind to overcome obstacles that would have crushed a stronger but less intelligent man. They showed that Athena's way, the way of strategic thinking and careful planning, was not just effective, but superior to mindless heroics. And in return for her guidance, these heroes honored Athena. They built temples to her, made offerings, told their children about the goddess who had saved them. They understood that Athena's patronage was not just about surviving their quests, but about becoming better men in the process. She demanded more from her favorites than other gods did, but she also gave more, not just divine power, but divine wisdom, and that made all the difference. Not all who encountered Athena were heroes worthy of her protection. Some were ordinary mortals whose skill attracted divine attention, and not always in ways that ended well. The story of Arachne, the mortal weaver who dared to challenge a goddess, stands as one of the most famous cautionary tales in Greek mythology. It is a story about art and pride, about the relationship between mortal talent and divine authority, and about the terrible price of hubris. Arachne was a young woman from Lydia, daughter of a dye merchant named Idmon. She possessed no noble lineage, no divine ancestry, nothing to mark her as special except for one thing: she could weave like no other mortal had ever woven. Her fingers moved across the loom with supernatural grace. The cloth she produced was so beautiful, so intricate and perfect, that people traveled from distant cities just to watch her work. Nymphs left their forests and streams to observe her technique, marveling at how the threads seemed to flow through her hands like water, forming patterns of stunning complexity. Arachne's fame spread throughout the Greek world. People whispered that she must have been trained by Athena herself, that only divine instruction could account for such skill. But Arachne rejected this notion with vehemence that bordered on contempt. She insisted that her talent was her own, earned through practice and dedication, owing nothing to any goddess. Some might have called this honest confidence. The gods called it hubris, the dangerous pride that precedes a fall. Athena heard the rumors, heard how this mortal girl claimed her gifts were self-taught, how she denied any divine influence on her art. The goddess could have ignored the slight. She could have remained on Olympus and let Arachne live her mortal span without interference. But Athena was also patron of craftsmen, including weavers. Weaving itself was partly her gift to humanity, one of the civilizing arts she had taught mortals. For someone to excel at this craft while denying the goddess any recognition was not just prideful but insulting. Athena decided to test Arachne's character before passing judgment. She transformed herself into an old woman, bent with age, and visited Arachne's workshop. There she watched the young weaver work, then spoke with the gentle authority of the elderly. "You are skilled indeed, child, but perhaps not as skilled as you believe. Surely you must acknowledge that your gifts come partly from divine inspiration. Perhaps you should thank Athena for your talent and show proper humility before the gods." Arachne's response sealed her fate. She turned from her loom with eyes blazing and declared that she needed no help from Athena or any god. Her skill was hers alone. She went further, her words dripping with arrogance. If Athena was such a masterful weaver, let the goddess come and prove it. Let them have a contest, weaver against weaver, and see whose work was truly superior. The air in the workshop grew suddenly cold. The old woman's form shimmered and changed, growing taller, younger, radiating divine power. Athena stood revealed, no longer disguised, her eyes hard as flint. The other weavers in the workshop fell to their knees, terrified. Nymphs who had been watching fled, but Arachne, though her face paled, did not bow. She raised her chin and repeated her challenge. "Then let us weave. Let all see who is truly the master." Athena accepted. 2 looms were prepared side by side. The goddess and the mortal took their positions. All of Lydia seemed to hold its breath as the contest began. Athena wove a scene of divine majesty and judgment. Her cloth showed the 12 Olympian gods seated in glory upon their thrones, Zeus at the center with his thunderbolt, each deity portrayed with perfect dignity and power. In the 4 corners of the work, she wove warnings, 4 separate myths of mortals who had challenged the gods and suffered transformation as punishment. There was Rhodope, turned into a mountain for her presumption. There was the Pygmy Queen, transformed into a crane. There was Antigone of Troy, made into a stork for competing with Hera. And there was Cinyras, whose daughters became stone temple steps. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who dare elevate themselves above their station. Each thread was perfect. Each color blended seamlessly into the next. The technical execution was flawless. The work radiated divine authority and purpose. This was not just art, it was a warning. Arachne wove a different story. Her cloth depicted the gods themselves, but not in glory. She chose as her subject the many times Zeus had disguised himself to seduce or rape mortal women. There was Zeus as a bull carrying away Europa, Zeus as a swan, forcing himself on Leda, Zeus as golden rain penetrating Danae's prison, Zeus as an eagle, as a satyr, as a shepherd. And not just Zeus. Apollo's conquests were shown, Poseidon's violations, Dionysus's seductions. The gods were portrayed as lustful, deceitful abusers of power, who preyed upon mortals unable to resist them. It was accusatory art, speaking truth to divine power in a way that few mortals would dare. And technically it was perfect. Every feather on Zeus's eagle form was individually rendered. Every expression on the victims' faces conveyed their mixture of fear and unwilling desire. The borders were decorated with flowers and ivy, beautiful and intricate. The work was a masterpiece, perhaps the greatest piece of weaving ever created by mortal hands. Athena examined Arachne's work with eyes that missed nothing. She searched for even the smallest flaw, any excuse to declare herself the superior craftsperson. She found none. The truth was inescapable and infuriating. Arachne's work equaled or perhaps even surpassed her own. Not in divine power, but in pure technical skill, the mortal had matched the goddess. Rage exploded through Athena's divine frame. She had come to teach humility through competition, but instead she faced the ultimate insult, defeat by a mortal who had used that victory to mock the gods themselves. The careful control that usually characterized Athena's actions shattered. She tore Arachne's flawless work to shreds, destroying in seconds what had taken hours to create. Then she struck the young woman across the face with the wooden shuttle from the loom. Not once, but 3 times, with enough force to stagger her. Arachne, overwhelmed by shame, humiliation, and perhaps realizing too late the magnitude of her error, ran from the room. She found a rope and hanged herself, choosing death over living with the knowledge that her pride had led to such disaster. She swung there, life draining away, perhaps thinking her torment was finally over. But Athena would not allow even that escape. The goddess arrived as Arachne's consciousness faded. She sprinkled the hanging girl with juices from Hecate's herbs, and transformation began. Arachne's hair fell out, her nose and ears vanished, her head shrank to the size of a button. Her body contracted, becoming tiny and black. her arms divided and redivided, becoming 8 slender legs. What remained of her torso became a bulbous abdomen. Athena had turned Arachne into a spider, the creature that would come to bear her name in Greek, Arachne. But the transformation was more than punishment. It was a curse of eternal mockery. Athena declared that Arachne would weave forever, but no longer on a proper loom, creating works of art. She would spin webs from her own body, meaningless patterns in corners and rafters that humans would sweep away without a second thought. All her skill, all her talent, would be reduced to creating traps for flies, and this curse would extend to all her descendants. Every spider that ever lived would carry Arachne's punishment, spinning endlessly with exquisite skill, creating beauty that no one admired. The myth of Arachne and Athena has been interpreted in many ways over the centuries. On the surface, it is a straightforward tale of hubris punished, a warning that mortals should not challenge the gods. The Greeks told many such stories, using them to reinforce social order and religious piety. To claim equality with a god was to invite disaster, and Arachne's fate demonstrated this principle with brutal clarity. But the story contains darker undercurrents that complicate this simple reading. Arachne's crime was not incompetence. She truly was as skilled as she claimed. Her second crime was speaking truth, depicting the gods as they actually behaved in mythology, capricious, lustful, often cruel. For this honesty, she was destroyed and transformed. The story can be read as a critique of power itself, of how authority responds when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Athena, usually portrayed as the goddess of just wisdom, here acts with petty vengeance, unable to accept that a mortal might equal her in a craft she considered her own domain. The Roman poet Ovid, who recorded the most complete version of the story in his Metamorphoses, lived under the autocratic rule of Emperor Augustus and was eventually exiled for reasons never fully explained. Some scholars suggest Ovid used myths like Arachne's to comment on his own situation, on what happened to artists who displeased those in power. In this reading, Arachne becomes a symbol of the artist's dangerous position, creating beauty while walking a knife's edge between celebrating authority and exposing its flaws. The choice to transform Arachne into a spider, specifically, carries its own symbolism. Spiders create with their own bodies, spinning thread from within themselves, as Arachne's skill came from within. But spider silk, for all its incredible properties, is fragile, easily destroyed. Webs catch only small, insignificant prey. The greatest human craftsperson had been reduced to a creature whose work was both endless and meaningless, a punishment that perhaps reflected Athena's understanding that for a true artist, the inability to create meaningful work was worse than death. The myth also raises questions about the nature of talent and training. Arachne claimed her skill was purely her own, not divinely inspired. Was she wrong? Can mortals achieve greatness without divine favor? Or is all human excellence ultimately a gift from the gods? The Greeks debated this question, and Arachne's story provided no clear answer. Athena destroyed her partly for denying divine influence, but the goddess could not deny that Arachne's purely mortal skill had produced work equal to her own. Today we remember Arachne in the scientific name for spiders and spider-like creatures, Arachnida. Every time we brush away a cobweb, every time we marvel at an orb weaver's geometrically perfect web, we witness the echo of an ancient punishment. The girl who wove with such skill that she rivaled a goddess spins on, immortalized in the creatures that bear her name, a reminder of pride, punishment, and the complicated relationship between mortal and divine. The Trojan War, that decade-long conflict that would become the defining legend of Greek heroism, drew every Olympian god into its orbit. They took sides, supported favorites, and turned what might have been a simple siege into a cosmic struggle that shook the foundations of the ancient world. Among all the divine participants, none were more deeply invested or more actively involved than Athena. The war became her war, fought according to her principles, shaped by her interventions, and ultimately won through the kind of strategic brilliance that epitomized everything she represented. The origins of Athena's involvement traced back to an insult she could never forgive. The whole war began with a beauty contest, the judgment of Paris, where the Trojan prince was asked to choose the fairest among three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each offered him a bribe. Hera promised political power. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle. But Aphrodite offered something Paris wanted more: the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus. Paris chose Aphrodite, and from that moment, Athena became Troy's implacable enemy. The war that followed consumed a generation. Greek armies laid siege to Troy's massive walls, fighting not for 10 weeks or 10 months, but 10 full years. Heroes rose and fell. Hector, Troy's greatest defender, held the Greeks at bay season after season. Achilles, the mightiest Greek warrior, raged through the Trojan lines like a force of nature. The battlefield became a stage where gods and mortals danced together in complex patterns of loyalty, betrayal, glory, and death. Homer's Iliad, which covers only a small portion of the war's final year, shows Athena at her most active and most calculating. She fought directly on several occasions, abandoning the usual divine convention of working through mortal agents. When Ares, fighting for the Trojans, threatened to turn the battle's tide, Athena confronted him personally. She struck him down with a massive boulder, sending the god of war fleeing to Olympus like a whipped dog. The message was clear: strategic warfare would always triumph over mindless bloodlust. But Athena's most important contribution to the Greek cause came not through direct combat, but through her guidance of key warriors. She selected mortals whose natural abilities aligned with her values and enhanced those qualities, turning good fighters into legendary heroes. Diomedes was perhaps the greatest example. During one extraordinary day of battle, Athena infused him with divine strength and courage, then did something unprecedented. She removed the veil that normally separated mortal from divine sight, allowing Diomedes to see the gods as they moved across the battlefield. With this gift, Diomedes fought with almost superhuman effectiveness. He wounded the war god Ares, driving him from the field. He even attacked Aphrodite when the goddess tried to rescue her son Aeneas from the fighting, striking her wrist with his spear. Aphrodite fled, weeping, to Mount Olympus, where Athena mocked her. Perhaps she had scratched herself on a pin while coaxing some Greek woman to follow Trojan lovers. The insult was calculated to emphasize the difference between Athena, who understood warfare, and Aphrodite, whose realm was passion and pleasure, not strategic violence. Athena's support extended beyond combat tactics to psychological warfare. She filled her favored warriors with courage when they faltered, appeared to them in dreams or visions to offer counsel, and sometimes took human form to walk among the Greek army, inspiring confidence simply through her presence. But she also practiced deception when it served her goals. She tricked the Trojan archer Pandarus into breaking a truce by shooting an arrow at Menelaus, restarting the fighting when peace negotiations threatened to end the war before Troy's destruction was complete. The relationship between Athena and Odysseus proved particularly crucial. While Achilles provided the martial might the Greeks needed, Odysseus provided the strategic thinking, and Athena recognized in him a kindred spirit. Together, they planned operations, evaluated intelligence, and devised tactics. Athena pushed Odysseus to think beyond direct assault, to consider how Troy's weaknesses could be exploited in ways that brute force alone would never accomplish. This collaboration ultimately produced the war's most famous stratagem, the Trojan horse. The idea emerged from Odysseus's clever mind, but Athena's influence shaped it. Build a massive wooden horse, large enough to hold a dozen warriors hidden within its hollow belly. Claim it was an offering to the gods, meant to ensure safe passage home. Leave it outside Troy's gates. Let the Greek fleet sail away, appearing to abandon the siege, and wait for Trojan curiosity and religious fear to do what 10 years of fighting could not: open the city's gates. Some accounts credit Athena directly with inspiring Odysseus to devise this plan. Others suggest she merely approved and blessed it. Either way, the Trojan horse embodied everything Athena represented. It was warfare as art, victory through intelligence rather than strength, a solution that no amount of heroic valor could have achieved. The Greeks who hid inside that wooden belly included the most thoughtful of their warriors: Odysseus himself, Menelaus, Diomedes, and others who could be trusted to remain silent and patient for hours, while Troy debated whether to accept the apparent gift. The Trojans, after much argument, brought the horse within their walls. They celebrated their supposed victory with feasting and drinking that lasted long into the night. And when the city finally slept, satisfied that the war was over, the hidden Greeks emerged. They opened Troy's gates from within. The Greek fleet, which had only sailed around a nearby headland, returned in the darkness. The army poured into the city. What followed was slaughter, not battle. Troy burned. King Priam was killed at Zeus's altar. Queen Hecuba was enslaved. Hector's infant son Astyanax was thrown from the city walls. The Trojan women were distributed among the Greek victors as spoils of war. The city that had stood for generations was reduced to smoking ruins in a single night. And Athena, who had opposed Troy from the beginning, who had fought, strategized, and plotted for a decade, saw her will accomplished. Yet even in victory, Athena's sense of justice demanded recognition of proper conduct. When Ajax the Lesser dragged the Trojan princess Cassandra from Athena's temple and violated her, despite Cassandra clutching the goddess's statue as a supplicant seeking divine protection, Athena's fury turned against the Greeks themselves. The sacrilege demanded punishment. She convinced Poseidon to send storms that scattered the Greek fleet as they sailed home, destroying ships and drowning men. Many heroes who had survived 10 years of war drowned within sight of Greece. Those who did make it home often found further troubles waiting. The homecomings became almost as legendary as the war itself, tales of curse and consequence that reminded the victors that even in triumph, hubris would not be tolerated. The Trojan War demonstrated Athena's capacity for long-term strategic thinking. She maintained focus on her objective, Troy's destruction, across a decade of setbacks and complications. She understood that wars were won not just through battlefield heroics, but through morale, logistics, intelligence, and the careful cultivation of alliances. She showed patience when patience served her goals, and decisive action when the moment for action arrived. And she proved that the goddess who valued wisdom and careful planning could be just as dangerous, perhaps more dangerous, than gods of war who simply raged and destroyed. Yet the war also revealed Athena's capacity for ruthlessness. She held grudges. She demanded respect and punished those who failed to give it. She used mortals as pieces in divine games, caring more for victory than for the individual human costs. Heroes died because she needed them to die, sacrificed on altars of strategic necessity. Cities fell because she willed it. The same goddess who promoted civilization and justice could, when motivated by wounded pride or determination to achieve her goals, become as destructive as any force in the cosmos. The Trojan War stood as Athena's greatest achievement and perhaps her greatest revelation. Here was the goddess of wisdom at her most powerful and most terrible, proving that intelligence without compassion could be as dangerous as strength without restraint. The ruins of Troy smoldered as testament to what happened when Athena set herself against you, and the scattered Greek fleet demonstrated that even her allies were not immune from her judgment if they violated the codes she held sacred. To see Athena in ancient art is to recognize her instantly, even before reading any inscription or examining context. More than perhaps any other Olympian deity, Athena possessed a distinctive visual vocabulary, a set of symbols and attributes that marked her presence and conveyed layers of meaning that every Greek viewer would have understood immediately. These symbols were not mere decoration. Each carried theological significance, each told part of her story, each revealed something essential about her divine nature. The owl perches at the center of Athena's iconography, so intimately associated with the goddess that ancient Athenian coins bore the bird's image on one side and Athena herself on the other. The little owl, Athena Noctua, became synonymous with wisdom throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and beyond. The connection seems obvious. Owls appear wise, with their large, forward-facing eyes and their solemn expressions. They hunt at night, seeing what others cannot in the darkness. They turn their heads with uncanny mobility, seeming to observe everything around them. But the relationship between Athena and owls may run deeper than symbolic convenience. Some scholars suggest that Athena evolved from a pre-Greek bird goddess, perhaps originating among the Minoan civilization or even earlier European cultures. In some very early artistic representations, Athena herself has bird-like features or wings. Over time, as Greek culture developed and the goddess took on more anthropomorphic characteristics, these avian elements separated from her body and became the companion owl that perched on her shoulder or flew ahead of her. The owl's nocturnal nature aligned with Athena's association with seeing clearly, with perceiving truth that others missed. Night symbolized the unknown, the mysterious, the hidden. An owl's ability to navigate darkness, to hunt successfully when other creatures were blind, paralleled Athena's gift for seeing through deception and finding solutions that others overlooked. The bird became a living emblem of her particular kind of wisdom, practical, observant, patient, capable of striking when the moment was right. Athens itself became identified with owls because of the goddess's patronage. Countless owls nested in the buildings and rocky crags of Attica. The historian Aristophanes noted the large owl population, and the phrase "bringing owls to Athens" became proverbial, meaning to bring something to a place where it already exists in abundance, like our modern carrying coals to Newcastle. The city's silver coins, stamped with Athena's helmeted head on one side and her owl on the other, circulated throughout the Mediterranean as a form of international currency, spreading the image of goddess and bird far beyond Greece. The olive tree stands as Athena's second great symbol, representing her victory in the contest with Poseidon and her gift to Athens. But the symbolism extends beyond that founding myth. Olives require patience. The trees take years to mature and begin producing fruit, but once established, they live and give for centuries. This paralleled the kind of wisdom Athena embodied, not flashy or immediate, but enduring and perpetually valuable. The olive branch became a universal symbol of peace, derived from Athena's nature as a goddess who preferred strategic resolution over endless conflict. Warriors might carry olive wreaths to indicate peaceful intentions. Suppliants might hold olive branches when seeking mercy. The tree itself, with its silver-green leaves shimmering in Mediterranean sunlight and its gnarled trunk speaking of years survived, embodied resilience, peace, prosperity, and the patient cultivation of civilization that Athena championed. Athens maintained a sacred grove of olive trees on the Acropolis, with the original tree said to have been planted by Athena herself, occupying the place of highest honor. When these trees produced olives, the oil was used in sacred rituals and given as prizes to victors in athletic competitions. This oil, stamped with official seals guaranteeing its provenance from Athens's sacred olives, was among the most prized substances in the ancient world. To receive it meant you had honored the goddess through excellence. But Athena's most fearsome attribute was undoubtedly the aegis, that mysterious object described variously as a shield, a cloak, a breastplate, or some combination of all three. The word aegis itself is contested, possibly deriving from a term for goatskin, and myths disagree about its origins. Some say Zeus originally possessed it, created from the hide of the goat Amalthea, who had nursed him as an infant. Others claim Athena fashioned it from the skin of a giant she had slain. Regardless of its origins, Athena made the aegis distinctly her own by adding its most notorious feature, the Gorgonean, the severed head of Medusa. Perseus had given Medusa's head to Athena as gratitude for her help in slaying the monster, and the goddess mounted it on her aegis. The Gorgon's face stared out from Athena's chest or shield, snakes writhing where hair should be, mouth twisted in a permanent expression somewhere between rage and agony. The head retained its petrifying power even in death. Anyone who looked directly upon it would turn to stone, making the aegis both defensive protection and offensive weapon. Merely revealing it could end battles before they truly began, as enemy warriors froze in place, transformed into statues by Medusa's still potent gaze. The symbolism cut multiple ways. On one level, placing Medusa's head on her aegis showed Athena's mastery over chaos and terror, her ability to control and direct even the most destructive forces toward productive ends. She had taken something that existed to harm and transformed it into protection for the just. On another level, it demonstrated that Athena, for all her association with wisdom and civilization, possessed a dark, terrible aspect. She could unleash horror when necessary. Her justice could be merciless. The goddess who taught crafts and promoted peace could also inspire the kind of paralyzing fear that turned men's bones to jelly and their flesh to marble. Athena's military equipment completed her visual identity. She wore the Corinthian helmet, that distinctive bronze headgear with its high crest, nose guard, and cheek pieces that left only eyes and mouth exposed. Sometimes she wore the helmet pushed back on her head, revealing her face. Other times it covered her features, transforming her into an anonymous warrior. She carried a spear, not as decoration, but as a weapon she knew how to use, and she held a shield, often circular in the Greek style, typically emblazoned with sacred images. Unlike Ares, who might be depicted dripping with blood, exulting in carnage, Athena's military appearance always maintained dignity and control. Her armor gleamed. Her weapons were sharp but clean. She looked like a warrior ready for battle, but not consumed by bloodlust. The visual message was clear. This was defensive warfare, strategic violence, combat undertaken for clear purposes rather than for the mere joy of destruction. Snakes appeared frequently in Athena's iconography, often as a border on her cloak or coiled at her feet. The serpent's symbolism was complex and multifaceted. Snakes represented wisdom in many ancient cultures, perhaps because they seemed to possess ancient knowledge, living close to the earth, disappearing into hidden places, shedding their skins in an apparent rebirth. They also represented danger and protection simultaneously. A snake could kill with a bite, but that same deadly nature made it an excellent guardian. Athens maintained a sacred serpent on the Acropolis, believed to be Athena's familiar, and the snake's refusal to eat offerings was interpreted as a sign that the goddess had temporarily abandoned the city. Taken together, these symbols painted a portrait of Athena's complexity. The owl spoke of wisdom and watchfulness. The olive tree promised peace and prosperity. The aegis, with its Gorgon head, warned of terrible judgment for those who opposed justice. The armor indicated readiness for defensive war. The snakes added layers of protection, danger, and ancient knowledge. Each symbol reinforced and complicated the others, creating an image of a goddess who could not be reduced to a single quality or simple archetype. When ancient Greeks saw any of these symbols, they thought immediately of Athena. The association was so strong that wearing an owl emblem or carrying an olive branch invoked her protection and her principles. Artists could indicate Athena's presence in a scene simply by including an owl or showing a figure holding her distinctive shield. The visual vocabulary became a kind of theological shorthand, conveying in an instant what paragraphs of text might struggle to explain. These symbols persist even today, thousands of years after the last prayers were offered in Athena's temples. Owls still represent wisdom in countless modern contexts, from university emblems to bookstore logos. Olive branches remain synonymous with peace, appearing on United Nations insignia and in countless diplomatic contexts. Even the word aegis survives in modern English, meaning protection or sponsorship, derived from Athena's protective shield. The goddess's symbols have outlived her worship, continuing to carry meaning long after the civilization that created them faded into history. To approach the Acropolis of Athens in the 5th century BCE was to ascend into a realm where divine and human achievement merged into something transcendent. The rocky outcrop rose abruptly from the surrounding plain, its limestone cliffs forming natural fortifications that had protected the earliest settlements in Attica. But by the classical period, the Acropolis had become far more than a fortress. It was sacred ground, the dwelling place of the city's patron goddess, and the architectural expression of everything Athens believed itself to be: wise, powerful, beautiful, and divinely favored. The Parthenon dominated the summit, visible for miles in every direction, its massive marble columns gleaming white against the Mediterranean sky. This temple, completed in 438 BCE, represented the pinnacle of classical Greek architecture and Athenian confidence. It was built with wealth flowing into Athens from its maritime empire, constructed during the city's brief moment as the most powerful polis in the Greek world, and dedicated to Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin. The temple's proportions exemplified mathematical precision and aesthetic sophistication. The columns, which appear perfectly straight to the human eye, actually curve slightly, a technique called entasis that compensates for optical illusions and creates an impression of organic vitality rather than rigid geometry. The entire building incorporated subtle variations from perfect regularity, adjustments made to account for how the human eye perceives massive structures from various distances and angles. Every measurement was calculated to create not just a building, but an experience of harmonious perfection. Inside the Parthenon stood a statue that became one of the wonders of the ancient world, Athena Parthenos, created by the sculptor Phidias. The statue reached nearly 40 feet in height, constructed around a wooden core overlaid with ivory for the flesh and 40 talents of gold for the armor, clothing, and accessories. The gold alone represented an almost inconceivable amount of wealth, assembled into an image of divine magnificence. Athena stood in full armor, her helmet crested, her spear reaching toward the ceiling, her shield resting at her side. In her right hand she held a small figure of Nike, goddess of victory, emphasizing that Athena brought not just warfare, but victorious warfare. Battles won through strategic superiority. The shield's exterior showed carved reliefs of the Amazonomachy, the battle between Greeks and Amazons. The interior depicted the Gigantomachy, the war between gods and giants. Both scenes celebrated victories of civilization over chaos, order over disorder, reinforcing Athena's role as protector of civilized society. The statue's face, framed by her helmet, gazed out with an expression that sources describe as simultaneously majestic and serene. She looked like a goddess who knew her own power, but felt no need to rage or threaten. Her confidence was absolute. Her protection was assured. To stand before Athena Parthenos in the dim interior of her temple, with light filtering through the massive doorway to illuminate the ivory and gold, must have been an experience that transcended the merely aesthetic. It was encountering the divine made almost physically present. But the Parthenon was not the only structure on the Acropolis sacred to Athena. The Erechtheion, completed later in the 5th century, housed multiple shrines and sacred objects. This building's most famous feature, the Porch of the Maidens, used 6 sculptures of women called caryatids as supporting columns, their robes carved to suggest the fluting of conventional pillars, their poses suggesting both strength and grace. Inside the Erechtheion, the Athenians preserved what they believed to be marks left by Poseidon's trident during his contest with Athena for the city's patronage. A well of salt water still demonstrated Poseidon's gift, and in a courtyard integrated into the temple's design grew an olive tree, said to be descended from, or perhaps even identical to, the original tree Athena had created. The Erechtheion thus served as a living museum of Athens's founding myths, a place where legend and architecture intertwined. The third major temple on the Acropolis, the Temple of Athena Nike, celebrated the goddess in her aspect as bringer of victory. This small but perfect structure stood at the edge of the cliff, visible to anyone approaching the Acropolis, a statement that Athens's military success came through Athena's favor. Inside stood a wingless statue of Nike, deliberately depicted without her usual wings. Athenians called this Nike Apteros, Nike without wings, interpreting her form as a guarantee that victory would never fly away from their city. The greatest celebration of Athena came during the Panathenaic festival, held annually but with special magnificence every 4th year in the Great Panathenaea. This festival, among the oldest and most important in Athens, honored the goddess's birthday and gave citizens an opportunity to demonstrate their devotion through religious ritual, athletic competition, and civic celebration. The festival lasted several days and included diverse events. There were athletic contests similar to those at the Olympic Games, though open to a broader range of participants. There were musical competitions where poets and musicians performed, contests in reciting Homer's epics from memory, and displays of martial skill. Winners received Panathenaic amphorae, special painted pottery filled with sacred olive oil from Athens' own trees, marking them as favorites of the goddess. But the emotional and religious center of the Panathenaic festival was the procession that carried a new peplos, a woven robe, to Athena's statue. This garment, woven by specially chosen women over months of careful work, depicted scenes from Athena's myths embroidered or woven directly into the fabric. The entire city participated in the procession that brought this gift to the goddess. Citizens, freed slaves, and resident foreigners all had assigned places in the line. Musicians played, people carried offerings, sacrificial animals were led toward the altar. The Parthenon's frieze, which ran around the interior of the outer colonnade, depicted this very procession, capturing in marble the ritual that defined Athenian civic and religious identity. Scholars debate exactly which aspects of the procession are shown and what symbolic significance different elements carry, but the overall meaning is clear. The people of Athens presenting themselves to their goddess, honoring her, seeking her continued protection and favor. Athena's worship extended far beyond Athens, though nowhere else matched the capital's devotion. In Sparta, Athena was honored as a patron of warfare alongside their own local deities. In Corinth, she protected craftsmen and artisans. Cities throughout the Greek world maintained temples to her, recognizing that even if she belonged especially to Athens, her gifts of wisdom, strategic thinking, and civilizing arts were universal goods that all humans needed. The rituals of worship followed typical Greek patterns. Sacrifices of animals, usually bulls or rams, with the meat divided between the gods, who received the bones and fat burned on altars, and the human worshippers, who consumed the meat in communal feasts. Offerings of olive oil, wine, grain, and other goods were made at her altars. Prayers were spoken, asking for her favor in specific undertakings, before battle, before beginning important construction, before making weighty decisions that would affect the community. But worship of Athena also included more distinctive elements that reflected her particular nature. Craftspeople brought their first products of a new trade to her temples, asking her blessing on their work. Students sought her favor when beginning their education. Those facing difficult decisions or complex problems might sleep in her temples, hoping she would visit their dreams with counsel. The goddess of wisdom was approached not just with sacrifices and ritual, but with questions, with problems, with the recognition that she offered not just power but guidance. In a world where gods often represented forces beyond human control, where Poseidon embodied the unpredictable sea and Zeus wielded incomprehensible cosmic justice, Athena stood for something more accessible. She represented human potential, elevated to its highest form. Worshipping her meant aspiring to think more clearly, to plan more wisely, to build things that would last, to fight only when necessary, and then to fight intelligently. Her temples were not just houses for a distant deity, but reminders of what humans could become if they cultivated wisdom alongside strength. The Acropolis, crowned with its marble temples, stood as a permanent statement of Athena's relationship with Athens and humanity more broadly. Long after the political power of Athens had faded, long after the democracy it pioneered had been replaced by other systems, long after the worship of Olympian gods had been supplanted by other religions, those temples remained. They remain still, 2,500 years later, testament to what Athena inspired, the belief that beauty, wisdom, and power could be combined to create something eternal. To understand Athena fully requires grappling with contradictions that ancient Greeks seemed to accept more easily than modern minds might. She was a warrior who promoted peace. She was born from a violent act, but represented rationality. She was patron of civilization who could be brutally merciless. She embodied wisdom, yet sometimes acted on wounded pride. These contradictions were not flaws in how the Greeks conceived her. They were essential to who Athena was, reflections of the complexity they saw in wisdom itself. Athena's virginity formed a crucial part of her identity, setting her apart from most Olympian goddesses. Hera was defined partly through marriage to Zeus, Aphrodite through sexual desire and beauty, Demeter through motherhood and the fertility of the earth. Artemis maintained her virginity, but did so as goddess of the wild, removed from civilization. Athena's virginity was different. She lived at the center of civic life, deeply engaged with mortal affairs, yet maintained complete autonomy over her own body and identity. No love affair, no husband, no children would ever compromise her independence or alter her fundamental nature. This virginity carried symbolic weight. Athena represented pure intellect, undistorted by passion or personal attachment, where Aphrodite's wisdom was clouded by desire and Hera's judgment warped by jealousy over Zeus's infidelities. Athena could think clearly precisely because she remained unentangled in the romantic and sexual complications that occupied so many other deities. Her virginity symbolized integrity in both senses of the word, moral uprightness and remaining whole, undivided, complete unto herself. Yet this very independence sometimes manifested as isolation. Athena had no true equals among the gods. Her relationship with Zeus was that of favored daughter to father, respectful and warm, but fundamentally unequal. With her half-siblings and other Olympians, she maintained collegial but distant relationships. She had no close friends among the gods, no confidants, no one who could match her intellectually and emotionally. Her closest connections were with mortals like Odysseus, and even those relationships existed across an unbridgeable gulf between divine and human. The myth of Erichthonius revealed both Athena's commitment to virginity and the strange indirect ways she could become entangled in stories of procreation. When the smith god Hephaestus attempted to force himself on Athena, she fought him off. In his frustrated attempt, his seed fell upon her leg. Disgusted, she wiped it away with wool and threw the cloth onto the earth. Gaia, the earth herself, accepted what Athena had rejected, and from this came Erichthonius, a child born from Hephaestus's seed. Athena's rejection and Earth's reception. Athena, despite not being his biological mother, took Erichthonius under her protection. She placed the infant in a box with specific instructions not to open it, then gave the box to the daughters of King Cecrops for safekeeping. They opened it, of course, humans being humans, and discovered the child's serpentine lower body. Driven mad by what they had seen, they threw themselves from the Acropolis. Athena then raised Erichthonius herself. He grew to become a king of Athens, credited with establishing many of the city's most important institutions. Through this strange, indirect path, Athena became associated with Athens' royal lineage without ever compromising her virginity. The Arachne story revealed darker aspects of Athena's personality. The goddess, who usually championed measured justice and strategic thinking, reacted with violent emotion when a mortal matched her skill. She destroyed Arachne's work, struck her, transformed her into a creature condemned to endless, meaningless weaving. This was not rational judgment. It was rage, wounded pride, the fury of a goddess who could not accept that in at least one narrow domain, a mortal had equaled her. This capacity for disproportionate punishment appeared in other myths as well. When the hunter Tiresias accidentally saw Athena bathing, she blinded him, taking his sight in payment for his having seen what no mortal should witness. Only through his mother's pleading did Athena relent enough to grant him prophetic powers in compensation for his lost vision. The goddess demanded absolute respect, and those who failed to provide it, even accidentally, suffered consequences. Yet Athena could also show mercy. She ultimately saved Arachne from death, even if the salvation came in the form of transformation into a spider. She granted Tiresias his prophetic gift. She repeatedly intervened to save her favored heroes when they faced impossible odds. Her capacity for compassion existed alongside her capacity for vengeance, both expressions of a personality that felt things deeply despite her association with cool rationality. This emotional complexity extended to her role as warrior goddess. Athena was perfectly capable of violence when she judged it necessary. She fought in the Gigantomachy, the war between gods and giants, crushing the giant Enceladus under the island of Sicily. She struck down Ares, the god of war himself, when he opposed her in the Trojan War. She could be absolutely ruthless in pursuing her objectives, but her violence was always controlled, directed toward clear goals, and tempered by strategic consideration of consequences. This made her simultaneously more dangerous and more trustworthy than deities who acted on impulse. You could predict Athena's actions if you understood the principles she valued: justice, wisdom, the protection of civilization, the punishment of hubris. She operated according to consistent if demanding standards, but those same standards meant she could be inflexible, unwilling to compromise her principles even when compassion might suggest a lighter touch. Athena's relationships with mortals revealed both her best and most problematic qualities. She inspired heroes to greatness, taught crafts that enriched human life, protected cities, and promoted civilization. She invested in mortals, spending divine attention and power to help them achieve things that would benefit humanity as a whole. Her patronage made individuals better and left societies transformed for the better. But she could also be demanding and unforgiving. Her heroes faced tests that killed many who attempted them. She expected intelligence, courage, and moral strength, and those who disappointed her found her support withdrawn. She used mortals as pieces in larger strategies, sacrificing individuals when necessary for greater goals. The distance between God and human, however much Athena narrowed it through her mentorship, could never be completely bridged. She could guide Odysseus, but could not save his crew when they foolishly ate Helios's cattle. She could help Perseus slay Medusa, but could not prevent all the suffering that followed from that victory. Perhaps most telling about Athena's character was how she balanced her various domains. She was simultaneously goddess of wisdom, warfare, crafts, and civic life. Each of these roles informed and tempered the others. Her wisdom made her a better warrior. Her understanding of warfare made her wiser about political decisions. Her appreciation for crafts kept her connected to the daily lives of ordinary people. Her civic focus ensured that all her other powers served the greater good of communities rather than just individuals. In Athena, the Greeks created a goddess who embodied their highest ideals while remaining recognizably complex, occasionally flawed, capable of both great good and severe judgment. She was never reduced to a simple archetype. She was not merely wise or merely warlike. She was the intersection of multiple qualities, sometimes harmonious and sometimes in tension, always striving toward excellence, while occasionally falling short of her own standards. This complexity made her not less valuable as an object of worship, but more so. A perfectly rational, perfectly wise, perfectly merciful deity might be admirable, but would remain distant from human experience. Athena, with her capacity for wounded pride, her occasional harsh judgments, her demands for respect and her fierce protection of those she favored, was a goddess humans could relate to while still aspiring toward. She showed that wisdom did not mean the absence of emotion, but the ability to govern emotion with reason. She demonstrated that strength without intelligence was wasted, and that intelligence without the courage to act was sterile. In her contradictions, Athena reflected the complexities of the civilization that worshipped her. Athens itself was a city of philosophers and warriors, of democratic ideals and imperial ambitions, of high culture and brutal politics. Athena embodied these tensions without resolving them, suggesting that perhaps greatness required holding contradictions in balance rather than eliminating them entirely. The temples on the Acropolis eventually fell silent. The last prayers to Athena in her Athenian sanctuaries were offered sometime in the late 4th or early 5th century CE, as Christianity supplanted the old gods, and the Parthenon was converted into a church dedicated to Mary. The worship that had sustained Athena's cult for more than a millennium ended, and with it, one might think, the goddess herself should have faded into purely historical interest. But Athena refused to die. Her influence on Western culture proved far too deep, too fundamental, too useful to be discarded simply because people stopped offering her sacrifices. She transformed, adapted, and persisted through the centuries in ways that few other ancient deities managed. The Romans had claimed her long before Christianity's triumph. When Rome encountered Greek culture and fell under its spell, they recognized in Athena qualities they valued in their own civilization. They renamed her Minerva, conflated her with earlier Italic goddesses of similar character, and adopted her wholesale into their pantheon. Minerva became one of the Capitoline triad, worshipped alongside Jupiter and Juno in Rome's most important temple. The Roman version emphasized Athena's association with practical arts, strategy, and civic protection, making her a patron of artisans, teachers, and strategic thinkers throughout the empire. Through Minerva, Athena's symbols and attributes spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Wherever Roman culture penetrated, images of the armed goddess with her owl and olive branch followed. Long after both Greece and Rome had fallen, those images remained embedded in the cultural imagination of societies that inherited their traditions. The Renaissance brought Athena roaring back into prominence. As European scholars rediscovered classical texts and artists sought to recapture classical aesthetics, the goddess of wisdom became a favorite subject and symbol. Paintings depicted her birth, her contest with Poseidon, her guidance of heroes. Sculptors carved her in marble, recreating lost masterpieces based on descriptions in ancient texts. She appeared in poetry, drama, and philosophical treatises as an embodiment of reason and enlightenment. The Enlightenment further elevated Athena's status. When thinkers like Voltaire, Hume, and Kant championed reason over superstition, knowledge over ignorance, they found in the ancient goddess a perfect symbol for their movement. Athena represented the triumph of rational thought, the power of education, the importance of strategy over violence. She became associated with the project of human progress through application of intelligence to society's problems. Universities and learned societies adopted her symbols. The owl appeared on countless educational institutions' seals and insignias. Libraries featured statues of Athena overlooking reading rooms. Legal institutions invoked her name as a symbol of wise judgment. She became shorthand for intellectualism, for the life of the mind, for the belief that knowledge could transform the world. Yet Athena's influence extended beyond academic and intellectual contexts. Her role as a strong, independent female figure who operated in traditionally masculine spheres of warfare and politics made her attractive to early feminists seeking historical examples of female power and agency. She represented a woman who had not gained authority through beauty or sexuality, but through intelligence and skill. Admittedly, her rejection of romantic relationships and her sometimes harsh treatment of other women complicated this appropriation, but her example of a powerful female deity who was taken seriously in her own right remained influential. In literature, Athena continued to appear as a character and symbol long after anyone worshipped her. James Joyce referenced her throughout Ulysses, his modernist reimagining of the Odyssey. His protagonist, Leopold Bloom, wandered Dublin rather than the Mediterranean. But Joyce invoked Athena as a presence of wisdom and guidance, just as Homer had. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series introduced her to a new generation of young readers, portraying her as a mother figure to demigod children who inherited her strategic intelligence. Madeline Miller's Circe presented Athena from a more critical perspective, examining the goddess's blind spots and cruelties. Modern psychology found in Athena a useful archetype. Carl Jung's work on collective unconscious included the warrior woman as one of humanity's fundamental symbols, and Athena became a prime example. Personality theorists identified the Athena type, strategic, rational, achievement-oriented, more comfortable with ideas than emotions. Whether or not such typing has validity, it demonstrates how deeply Athena has penetrated modern thinking about human nature. Political symbolism continues to invoke Athena. Her image appears on currency, government seals, and monuments. Nations reaching for legitimacy connect themselves to her legacy of wisdom and just warfare. The terminology she inspired remains embedded in language. We speak of things done under someone's aegis, meaning their protection and sponsorship, directly referencing her shield. We call trusted advisors mentors, from the form Athena took to guide Telemachus. Even the word panic comes from Pan, but our conception of strategic as opposed to panicked thinking owes much to Athena's example. The goddess who taught civilizations arts continues to influence how we think about intelligence and its proper use. The distinction she embodied between strategic, thoughtful combat and mindless violence remains relevant in discussions of military ethics and when warfare is justified. Her example suggests that true strength comes from combining physical power with mental discipline, that the warrior and the philosopher need not be separate, but can and should inform each other. Athens itself, the city that bore her name and housed her greatest temples, remains a symbol of cultural achievement. When we speak of the Athenian Golden Age, we reference a period when philosophy, drama, art, and democratic government flourished under Athena's symbolic protection. The Parthenon, even in ruins, still draws millions of visitors annually, still inspires awe, still stands as testament to what can be achieved when a society values wisdom and beauty alongside power. Athena's persistence through time reveals something profound about cultural memory and the power of well-crafted symbols. She survived the death of her worship because she represented qualities that transcend any particular religious system: wisdom, strategic thinking, the promotion of civilization, the patronage of learning, the discipline that turns raw strength into effective action. These remain valuable regardless of whether anyone believes in the literal existence of the goddess who embodied them. In an age of information overload and complex challenges requiring nuanced solutions, Athena's example perhaps resonates more than ever. We need wisdom to sort through contradictory data. We need strategy to address problems that have no simple solutions. We need the kind of intelligence that can see 3 steps ahead, that can find creative approaches to seemingly impossible dilemmas, that can combine moral clarity with tactical flexibility. The goddess born from Zeus's head, who taught heroes to think as well as fight, who gifted Athens its defining symbol, who transformed even enemies like Medusa into tools of justice. She continues to teach us, continues to inspire us, continues to challenge us to be smarter, wiser, better than our first impulses might suggest. Athena's legacy proves that the best ideas, the most powerful symbols, the most useful exemplars of virtue can outlive the civilizations that created them, adapting to new contexts while maintaining their essential meaning. And so the owl still represents wisdom. The olive branch still symbolizes peace. The image of a strong woman in armor, thinking before acting, still speaks to something deep in human nature. Athena lives, not in literal temples or through literal worship, but in the continuing influence of everything she represented. In every moment when intelligence triumphs over brute force, when strategy succeeds where violence would fail, when someone chooses the thoughtful path over the easy one. As we reach the end of tonight's journey through Athena's myths and meanings, perhaps the most striking realization is how relevant she remains. The goddess born from thought itself, who championed wisdom without abandoning strength, who understood that civilization requires both sword and olive branch. Her lessons speak across millennia as clearly as they did in ancient Athens. Athena reminds us that intelligence without courage is timid, but courage without intelligence is reckless. She shows us that the greatest victories come not from the mightiest blow, but from the clearest thinking. She demonstrates that power should serve purpose, that strength finds its truest expression when guided by wisdom. And she teaches us that the crafts we practice, the communities we build, the knowledge we pursue, these are the things that outlast empires and echo through eternity. From her impossible birth to her guidance of heroes, from her contest for Athens to her complex contradictory character, Athena embodies the heights of what humanity aspires to be: thoughtful, strategic, skilled, just, protective of civilization while capable of defending it. She is neither perfect nor simple, and in that complexity she becomes all the more valuable as an example. The Parthenon still stands on the Acropolis, weathered by time but unbroken in spirit, much like the goddess it honored. That olive tree still grows where Athena planted it, or perhaps its descendant does, or perhaps a symbolic replacement, but the meaning persists regardless. Wisdom was chosen over power, peace over violence, the long view over immediate gratification, and Athens became immortal not through its armies, but through its ideas. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Athena's mythology and legacy. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into the myths and legends that have shaped human culture. Share this video with anyone who might appreciate learning about the goddess of wisdom, and let me know in the comments what other figures from mythology you'd like to explore next. Until next time, may you think clearly, act wisely, and remember that the greatest battles are won not on the field, but in the mind. Good night, and thank you for listening.